I think the most important question for any candidate ever is why you and why now?
My generation will bear the brunt of the economic crisis due to COVID. And I think, especially right now, we've seen how young people, we are politically engaged and we're active. And my generation can't afford to wait to run for office. Our lives depend on running now. And I see these rural communities who aren't being properly represented in Madison. And as a young person, I want to one day return to my community. So right now, I want to go down to Madison and help our rural communities.
Okay. And what will you bring to Madison? How will you represent the Driftless region when you're in office?
I will bring a fresh, new perspective. Strong, independent leadership with no strings attached. I'm just ready to get down there and fight. I don't want to be a career politician. I'm not in it for anything other than making sure that our communities are represented. I think oftentimes we don't. In Madison, they focus a lot on the Madisons and Milwaukees and Green Bays and forget the Reedstowns and Gays Mills and Coon Valleys. And I also don't think that the partisan deadlock in Madison accurately represents our rural communities. We cross party lines every day, and I think we need representation that's willing to do the same.
And just a little bit, what differentiates you from your primary opponent, Tucker?
First of all, I'm willing to debate. I think is a big difference. The rest of the differences, I think that the voters, if you research me as a candidate and you research him as a candidate, they can come to those conclusions on their own. Look at our ideas, look at our visions for these districts, and then that's a solid way to find the differences out.
Okay. So let's role play here. Say it's August 12th. You've just won your primary. What does your campaign look like? What is your plan to win?
Grassroots movement. I think people are sick and tired of out-of-state interests buying our elections. I think people are sick and tired of the, toxic partisan deadlock in Madison. I just want to engage. I want to engage the youth vote, and I also want to reach everyone right now. Without sports and without TV shows, people are watching the news and they're upset and they're angry and they're feeling all these negative emotions because they're sick and tired of what's happening. And I think people are ready for some positive new change. So we're just going to go full steam ahead and on our path to Madison.
Okay, great. I have a few more questions, but I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for the candidate, please pop them into the chat. If you like, I can ask them or you can ask them yourselves. But we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions for Josefine, please pop them in. Josefine, tell us a little, you touched on it a little bit growing up or being born in Virginia. Tell us a little bit more about your history and what brought you to this moment. Tell us about your values.
So my dad provided me with examples of service every day, not only to your country, but also to your community. And when he retired, we moved here to the Kickapoo Valley, and my grandma was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So we had to take care of her. She was a Norwegian immigrant who came to America and just fell in love with her adopted country. She was super involved in the local communities, even though she wasn't a citizen. She was involved on every board, council, and that was another example of service to me. Now I'm a third generation member of our church council. And watching my grandma struggle, and watching my family struggle with putting her in a nursing home and the cost of that. We were at the verge of almost having to sell the family farm, which my uncle farms, and he couldn't buy her out. And that was really frustrating. And then in 2018, I volunteered on the Paul Burr campaign, and watching all that dark money pour into this district, you know, our community members weren't deciding who their representative was. Out-of-state interests were. And the gerrymandering that has plagued our state, I was just frustrated. You know, everything seemed to be going against the average American. And I thought, who could be a good candidate this time around? And then I thought, why not me? Why does my age have to be a disqualifier? Why can't I fight for our rural values and for my generation? And I spent 5 months talking with different individuals about possibly running for state assembly. It wasn't a just spur of the moment decision. It was a long process until I announced. And here we are. And people have been really supportive of this campaign. They're not discrediting me for my youth. They think it's, you know, something to hope for. It's exciting. You know, my generation, we're showing people that we are a force to be reckoned with. And not only do I want to be a voice for my generation, but I want to be a voice for these communities, the communities that raised me.
Rolling back a little bit on that answer, I know that you mentioned caregiving in regards to your grandmother. I understand how tough that must have been. We currently in Wisconsin face a real crisis when it comes to caregiving. We're not taking care of, we're not providing daycare. We're not providing elder care. We're not paying our home health care workers enough. What kind of vision do you have for caregiving in Wisconsin? What is broken, and how would you fix it?
I work part-time at a nursing home. So every day I get to see exactly how the system is broken. You know, these CNAs are overworked and they're underpaid. And the issue in these in these rural communities is the fact that, you know, Medicaid reimbursement is really the biggest issue for these local services. They're not getting the funding that they need. And we're at risk of having, you know, corporate greed come in and consolidate and eliminate. And if that happens, not only do we lose these services on a local level, but we also lose these jobs. People shouldn't have to drive an hour or two to go visit their grandma. And people shouldn't have to drive an hour or two to go to work. What we really need to fix is the Medicaid reimbursement system. I know locally, some of these nursing homes, they lose an average of $80 per day per resident. If you add that up, you know, the amount of residents on Medicaid, and you total that by how many days per year, it's insane. How can we expect these services to continue locally if we don't fund them? And that's an issue that the state has to deal with. We need to make sure that these services can remain local. You mentioned daycare. I don't understand why other candidates don't talk about that. That is so important to have, you know, quality, affordable daycare. How can we expect people to return home to raise families if they don't have a safe place to put their kids? Right now we're seeing it with schools being canceled, or being not canceled, but with schools closing. Families are struggling with where to keep their kids at home, and people shouldn't have to worry about that their kids are safe. So that we need to work with local providers and find ways to incentivize investments in the community to start daycares and other caregiving services.
One of the other things that you mentioned was gerrymandering. How do you see Wisconsin is, as I think we all know, has been rated as one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country. We've gone before the Supreme Court before. What is your fix? How would you like to see gerrymandering fixed in the state so that voters are choosing their politicians and not the other way around?
I mean, gerrymandering has stripped our right to vote because the maps pre-decide the outcome. In Madison, I would support Governor Evers' nonpartisan redistricting commission. I think that's essential. I don't think either party should get to choose what the maps look like, and I'll fight for fair maps. In this district alone, 3 of the counties have passed a fair maps resolution, and both Vernon and Monroe County have passed a fair maps referendum. So the people of this district want fair maps. They want to be able to choose their representatives. And in Madison, I'll fight for that.
Okay. And one other thing you mentioned pay when it comes to home healthcare workers. I'm wondering about pay in general. Do you support a better, higher minimum wage for Wisconsinites?
Especially right now, how we're seeing people struggling to pay rent, to pay for food. You know, this COVID has created an economic crisis, and what's happening right now, it isn't working clearly. So we need to look at different solutions, different possible solutions, and I think raising the minimum wage is one of them.
And what if you had to pick 3 main priorities when you get to Madison? 3 things that you really think need to happen to better Wisconsin as a whole. What 3 priorities would you pick?
For me, my number 1 priority is saving these rural communities, and by doing that, we need to fund our rural schools. We need to have clean water. We need housing, affordable daycare and broadband. I mean, that's way more than 3, but they all kind of lump together in that, working to attract future generations to return home. All these issues are incredibly important. Probably top 3 would be, education, clean water, and broadband.
Yep. Now, speaking of broadband, I'm sure you saw Governor Evers is forming a task force on expanding broadband. Do you have any thoughts on how he could work and how the legislature could work to expand broadband so it is available to every Wisconsinite?
I think broadband, we need to treat it like the rural electrification that happened in the 20s and 30s. We need to get funding to these rural utilities, make broadband a utility. And that would help, build out that rural infrastructure. Broadband is so important because it touches on everything. Education, we've seen that clearly with schools closing. Broadband is critical. Tourism, agriculture, telemedicine right now during COVID, that would be life-saving to make sure that our healthcare providers are staying safe while also diagnosing. Right now we see in hospitals, you can't have visitors, you can't have anybody come with you to an appointment. Broadband in the past 3-4 months has become a number 1 issue.
You mentioned telehealth, and obviously we're living through the worst pandemic of any of our lives right now. Healthcare is something that everyone's thinking about. What do you see on the state level? What do you think the legislature could do to improve the accessibility and quality of healthcare in Wisconsin?
Number 1, they could accept the federal dollars to expand Medicaid. Oklahoma did it before we did. And that's our money. We paid that. And they're refusing to accept the money that we paid in order to provide life-saving services for our residents. That isn't right. I also think we need to look at reimbursement rates in order to make sure our hospitals and nursing homes and local clinics can stay local. And then creating a public option for Badger Care. Especially right now, we see so many people without health insurance due to this economic crisis.
What do you feel are some of the biggest, most pressing concerns to the people of the Driftless region right now, both in the time of COVID and before the time of COVID? What do you think is keeping voters up at night right now?
I think right now is the uncertainty of COVID, we're not sure the true economic impact that this will have. And that's terrifying. People are concerned about whether schools will be back in the fall. Small businesses are worried about, is it safe? It's not safe to really be open, but they have to be open and they're not receiving the proper aid. So in the time of COVID, it's definitely the economic fallout. What's that going to look like? Before that, I think, clean water and flooding, we're having these 100, 500-year floods every 2 years, and everyone's just kind of waiting, when's the next one? And that also is not okay. We need to look at how to help our communities.
And as we all know, the Driftless region relies on agriculture. It's our backbone here. Wisconsin is facing a real crisis when it comes to family-owned farms. What do you think the legislature can do to protect Wisconsin's small independent farms?
I was at the Dairy Expo the day that our Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, said, "Go big or go home," and that's not okay. Our district prides itself on having family farms. That's our identity, is the family farm. And we're really lucky in this district because we see a lot of people transitioning into kind of niche farming, which is one way to help save the family farm. I think we need to make sure that CAFOs are heavily regulated to make sure that these family farms have a fighting chance, because they're often practicing environmentally friendly practices. So to make sure that these CAFOs are regulated, we just need to work with the farmers and find out, what do you need and how can we help you? And that just needs to be a conversation with the state government and our family farmers.
So when you're elected, when you're in Madison, there's a good chance, probably an overwhelming, probably without a doubt, you would be in the minority. How will you work to make sure that you can bring positive change to Wisconsin and in the Driftless region while being in the minority?
I'm willing to work with both parties as long as we're accomplishing what's best for our rural communities. But in all honesty, I can't control what they do. So if the majority won't work with us, then, we need the residents of Wisconsin to pressure the majority into getting involved in some bipartisan work. It's up to the voters to make sure that they hold their legislators accountable. But I, as an individual, am willing to work with both sides to accomplish what needs to be done.
Karen Dahl says, Citizens United has tipped the balance away from individual small donors to big anonymous donors who buy candidates and affect elections. In a perfect world, what would you do to fix what's broken in campaign finance reform? Then I do have a follow-up question after that.
I agree that we need to have campaign finance reform. We do. As an individual, I am not accepting PAC money. I'm only accepting individual contributions, because I don't think that out-of-state interests should be buying our elections. And that's hard to pass, especially when, the majority, that's how they get in the majority, is through these crazy dark money, super PAC spending. And I can just promise that in Madison, I will fight for campaign finance reform.
Okay. Would you work to have publicly funded elections? Do you believe that that's a viable option? That's
something that I have to look into a little bit more. that's a conversation I'm willing to have, but I need to educate myself a little bit more before I'm comfortable making a public opinion on it. But I can promise you that after this town hall, I will learn a lot more about that. And in a week from now, I'll learn even more than that, and I will have an answer. If Karen wants to email me afterwards, we can talk about it, and I'd be more than willing to follow up with her on that later.
Okay. Just a reminder, if anybody has questions, please pop them into the chat box. What would you say you're meeting with a voter in the Driftless region? What do you want to learn from them? What do you want to hear from them? What do you want to take away from a one-on-one meeting?
What are the issues that matter to them? The voters are the people who make up these rural communities, and in order to ensure that rural communities survive, we need to make sure people stay. And talking with them about what their issues are, especially right now during this pandemic, finding out what our state legislature can do to make sure that their life is easier. I just want to hear from them what they need to have done. I don't want to go out there and say, this is what I want. I mean, I have issues that are really close to my heart, but ultimately I'm going to be representing these individuals, and I need to fix their issues. So speaking with voters, I just want to know, what is your biggest concern and how can I help you?
Julie asks, what are your thoughts regarding term limits?
I don't think that anyone should hold a seat for forever. I think it's always good to get some fresh blood in there. I think we need to figure out, our founding fathers didn't, on a federal level, our founding fathers didn't put term limits in for a reason, but I don't think that they had in mind that people would hold seats for, 20, 30 years. I think we need to find kind of a happy medium regarding that. I know I don't intend to hold one seat forever because, you can't become complacent. You have to have something challenging and something moving things forward.
Okay. I know that you had mentioned before that you don't plan on being a career politician. Where do you see yourself in, say, 10, 15, 20 years? What does your world look like at that point?
I don't know what my world's going to look like in a month, and then depending on how the outcome of the primary election, I don't know what my life will look like after November. So that's a pretty hard question to answer. But I'm not sure. Right now I'm just looking at August. That's my focus.
Just being completely honest, your generation has been dealt a really bad hand when it comes to climate change. You are going to bear the brunt of several generations of people ignoring everything. What do you think the Wisconsin legislature can do to address climate change and reduce carbon emissions in Wisconsin? And then there's going to be a follow-up after that as well.
I think that we need to work to incentivize environmentally friendly practices. My generation, we will bear the brunt of the lack of action of previous generations. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not waiting until later in my life to run for office, because I'm not guaranteed that later in life. And I think that's, my generation understands that we're working to ensure a future for us, not to better our future, but to ensure one. So definitely we need to work to correct the wrongdoings.
Randy Skinner asks, what was the driving factor that caused you to run for office?
So as I said, I was a volunteer on the Paul Burr campaign, and watching that dark money and gerrymandering just really did not sit with me well. I was just incredibly frustrated because I believed that Paul Burr was the perfect candidate for the seat. And I was really upset, and I didn't know who would be the next best candidate. Next election, who would I get behind, and would there be somebody that I could fully believe in? And then I thought, why couldn't I be one? Why couldn't I be a candidate? My age should not be a disqualifier. And I understand that my generation, we're getting dealt a bad hand. And oftentimes, the legislators that are in our legislature right now, they don't have to suffer the long-term consequences of the policies that they enact. And my generation will. So I understand that, my generation, we deserve a seat at that table when those policies are being created. Offer that fresh perspective and that eye towards the future where we think of the long-term consequences. And not only that, but watching my community being misrepresented in Madison, our representative, he's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. But he's not that nice local guy when he's in Madison. In Madison, he votes with his party, and that isn't helping our rural communities. So I want to go down to Madison not only to represent my community, but my generation as well.
Becky asks, in your view, what needs to be done to improve and protect water quality and availability in our part of Wisconsin?
We need to regulate farming to make sure that they're doing environmentally safe practices. We need to ensure, that our wells have clean drinking water. And water is just so important in this district, not only for our health, but also for our tourism and our sportsman industries. We see that they heavily rely on our beautiful rivers and creeks. And I think that we just need to ensure that future generations get to reap those benefits as well.
I know that from past conversations you and I have had, you've always talked about the need to make sure that younger people want to raise their families in the Driftless area. You've talked about a real problem with people moving away. What do you think, both as a legislator and just someone who cares about this area of the state, what can be done to draw young families to want to live here?
That's such a personal issue for me because not only myself, but I see so many of my friends go off to college and then they can't return home. It's not that they don't want to, but they can't. Because once they get their degree, they're the closest they can get a job is Madison, La Crosse, but they want to come home. And so many issues fall into ensuring that those people can return home. We need broadband in this world. You have to be connected. No young person wants to live anywhere where they're not connected. My generation, more than any other, has been connected to this whole big outside world, which I think has really helped with my generation being very open-minded. We're exposed to all sorts of different people and ideas. Housing is also really critical. We see a lack of housing in our district, especially with flooding. We see in these smaller communities, houses being just destroyed. We need affordable daycare. We need to fund our schools. I'm a product of rural public schools, and I'm incredibly proud. But we need to make sure that these schools are funded so that they don't disappear, because a lot of the communities in this district are built around the school. If you took Kickapoo away, there's very little left in Reedstown and Viola except for houses. If you took Wazeeka High School away, those communities would follow. And we need to ensure that these schools stay. Water is so important. Almost every issue falls into helping improve our communities, which in turn attracts younger generations to return home. Infrastructure, our roads, almost every issue you can kind of put into that.
Okay, I don't want to sound like I don't want to create celebrities out of politicians, but looking through political history, who are some of the people that you on a national level really look up to? Do you consider yourself like a Paul Wellstone or a Bernie Sanders, an AOC or an Amy Klobuchar? Who are some of your political inspirations?
One of my just absolute favorite politicians is Tammy Baldwin, because she provided a role model to me. Her on a federal level, and then Jennifer Schilling on a state level, showed me that women have a place in politics, because oftentimes we aren't represented. And to have that be my district was a woman, and then my senator was a woman, has been incredibly powerful to me. And also, I think really two politicians really stand out in my mind from growing up. Since I was born in Alexandria, Virginia, I was surrounded by history and government because I lived 5 minutes from DC. So when family would come to visit us, we'd take a tour of all the monuments. Those were some of my first words. And my favorite person when I was 3 years old was George Bush. My grandpa just said, just be glad I couldn't vote yet. As I grew up, I came to understand what he meant by that. But I knew that he was important because when I walked into my dad's building, his face was there, his portrait, because the president hangs in all the government offices. And then when when we lived in Alabama, where my dad was stationed, I remember that my school wasn't showing Obama's inauguration. They wouldn't show it. And I remember my dad took us out of school to watch. And I knew that was a big thing. My dad never took us out of school. School was important. But he took us out to watch the inauguration. And I remember there was kids running around and we were all playing. And my grandma said that was the first time she wished she was an American citizen, was to vote for Barack Obama. And my grandma loved Norway. She never wanted to give that up. But the fact that the only time she did was for this man. And then when he started to speak, that was the first time that I can ever remember stopping to listen to an adult, because I thought what he had to say was important. He was a complete stranger, but on TV, there was just a charisma about him that I knew what he had to say was important, and I wanted to listen. And I was the only kid. I stopped and I sat down and I listened because I was just awestruck. So really, Barack Obama has been a huge inspiration to me because, growing up, that was who the president was. He was who I followed. And then, not in real life, but Jed Bartlett from The West Wing. I started watching The West Wing in 5th grade. I'm not sure what 5th grader watches The West Wing, but I did. I loved it. And I mean, he's not a real person, but I really looked up to the way that he ran his campaigns and how he held his office. And he actually really helped me because when I was younger, I really struggled with my faith and my political beliefs. I thought that one party kind of owned faith, and that didn't agree with my politics. So I was really confused, but he helped me understand that that's not true. The Republican Party does not own faith. So really, that really helped me growing up. But I'd say my all-time is Tammy Baldwin, showing that a woman can hold her own in a male-dominated field. She's such an inspiration to me.
Kind of rolling off of that, I know that in your Citizen Action of Wisconsin endorsement interview, you mentioned your faith quite a bit and your activity in the church. Can you kind of delve in a little bit more how your faith has helped form you into the person you are today and form your political opinions to be what they are today? And can you talk a little bit about your experience in the church?
I was raised in the Lutheran Church, ELCA, which is one of the most liberal Christian sects. And but our national affiliation, their views don't always equal the views on small rural churches. But due to the fact that my dad was in the military, he was gone quite a bit, and every time he was gone, we would come up to the farm. We'd visit my grandma's farm. And every holiday, every summer, every school break, we were up at the farm. I was raised, right outside of Reedstown. I was baptized in my grandma's church, which is in Folsom, right outside of Soldiers Grove. And those individuals in my church really became family. At a young age, it was really hard to figure out who was relatives and who wasn't. And I was raised around a coffee table with my grandma visiting with her church friends. And that, my church really helped me understand that you could love someone who didn't agree with you, because not all of the individuals in my church agree with me politically. And I'm the youngest church council member to ever serve on our church. I serve as a deacon, and I read almost every other Sunday in church before COVID, which really helped me learn to like public speaking. That was, they really helped me with that. But I mean, I was raised in the church. Those people really showed me the sense of community. During the flooding, I would always volunteer with my church. And a lot of the core values that I hold come from my church family. And that is a big part of who I am. But I understand, the separation of church and state. And while I let that guide my personal beliefs, my faith is a big part of who I am. And I think it's high time that, Democrats show that, the Republican Party doesn't own Christian values. Jesus taught us to, we help those who need help, feed the poor, love the stranger. And I think those are democratic values.
Jane asks, Josephine, whoever wins will go up against Oldenburg. What makes you confident that you can get the votes needed? What sets you apart? I think this is really important because we are in the 96, we're in a swing district. So what sets you apart from Tucker, and what makes you confident that you can get the votes needed to flip the seat?
If my primary opponent won't debate me, how will he debate Oldenburg? How will he stand up to the GOP machine in Madison? I think that when I make it past the primary, I feel incredibly confident going against Representative Oldenburg. I think what makes me a better candidate is the fact that I do differ from him. I'm young, I'm female. Representative Oldenburg and I we're almost polar opposites. And I think people are really sick of politics as usual. They're tired of what's going on in Madison. They're tired of what's happening in DC. They're watching the news right now because everyone's kind of stuck at home, and they're feeling, all those negative emotions, angry, upset, tired. I was on the radio with Ernie Betts, and we were talking a little bit about my campaign. And I said, I want to be really accessible as a representative. I know Representative Oldenburg tells individuals to reach out to someone in his office, and they'll contact him. I want people to reach out to me. I've listed my cell phone number and my email. I want people to reach out to me. And when I said this on the radio, as soon as I stepped out of the booth, when I looked at my phone, I had a text from a male conservative voter who said he agreed that we need something new in Madison. We need youth. We need something to shake things up. And he said that if I make it to the November election, he will vote for whoever the best candidate is. I just need to prove to him that I am the best candidate. And I think that really showed me my message goes to both parties. This partisan deadlock isn't us. And I think people understand that, and they're sick and tired of, the GOP machine in Madison, and our representative is part of that. So I'm offering, strong independent leadership and a fresh new perspective with an eye towards the future. And I think people are ready to get on board with that.
Having just graduated, congratulations, by the way. Having just graduated, what are your thoughts on the current state of funding for our schools?
School funding is a major issue. This last budget finally got us caught up with what the funding had been before Act 10, and that doesn't account for, cost of living increase and things like that. And I think, our schools are kind of stuck with that, with the spending limits and that tax cap. And while that works, the issue is the formula doesn't. The idea is great, but the formula doesn't work, because when these caps were imposed in the early 90s, they were meant to rein in the higher spending school districts. But our rural schools, who had been conservatively spending, got locked in at their lower spending rates. And instead of just lasting for 5 years, they've lasted through now. And the formula doesn't work. So what we need to do is, working with the Wisconsin Rural School Alliance and with the Fair 8 Coalition and the Association for Equity and Funding, to figure out how can we fix the formula to work for our rural schools is really important. Right now, in the past 5 years, we've really seen an increase in referendums. Local communities are taking it upon themselves to raise their taxes in order to fund their schools, even though funding schools is supposed to be a state issue. We're seeing our local governments having to worry about that. And I think it's high time that the state government fixes that. So yeah, just funding our schools is so important. Education is the great equalizer. And where I went to school, education was people's only way out, to make sure that they got to go to college and things like that. And I think we need to fund our public schools.
How do you feel about teachers' pay right now in Wisconsin and in the Driftless area?
I think that, teachers are, they shape America. They have the future of America in their classrooms. That's what they're teaching. And I don't think that they're getting paid enough for what they do. I think right now, if we're going to be forcing them to return to school and put their lives on the line, we definitely need to increase their pay. They're not getting paid enough as it is, and now that they're being forced to go back, I think that pay needs to be increased for sure.
Now, this next question I want to ask you as a person, just a citizen, and as a potential legislator. So it might be two different answers. How do you feel about schools returning to in-person learning in 4 weeks?
Both as a future legislator and as a person, I don't believe that my opinion on this matter is relevant, because I'm not an educator and I'm not a health expert. I think that needs to be a conversation between educators and health experts, not administrators and health experts, but the educators, the ones who are in the classrooms, the ones who are putting their health at risk. I don't think it's fair to force teachers to make that decision. And I think we just need to listen to what our health experts say, because they're the experts. And I think that is a conversation that needs to be had between those two groups of individuals. And because I am neither an educator or a health expert, I don't think that my opinion is relevant. And my opinion will be shaped based on their recommendations. I will fight for whatever their recommendations are. That will be my opinion.
This next question, because you grew up in a military family, your father was enlisted, I think that you have a unique perspective on this. What do you think about the current level of military funding in America? Do you think it is too much, not enough? How do you feel about the amount that we spend on our military currently?
I think we could definitely spend a little more on our veterans. We have a homelessness crisis in our country. People who put their lives on the line to ensure our freedom are sleeping on the street, and that, we definitely need to fund initiatives to help them. We see with this current administration, we've seen certain health benefits cut, such as dental. I think, our military takes an incredibly large slice of our budget. And while I think we need to have a strong military, I also think we need to make sure that other programs are funded, like education. And but at the end of the day, that is a federal issue. And I think that that is something that we have to talk about on a federal level. On this in the state legislature, I'm not entirely sure what I could do about our military spending, but I definitely think that that's something that needs to be reviewed.
Yep. Lisa asks, do you support reproductive rights for women? If Roe versus Wade were overturned, would you fight in the Wisconsin Assembly for access to safe and legal abortion in the state?
Laws have never and will never prevent abortion. They just prevent safe abortions. I think what could help to reduce abortion is comprehensive sex education, access to funding for reproductive health care, and working to address domestic violence and abuse. As a woman, I strongly believe that women, like men, should have the right to make decisions over their own bodies. And I will always fight for women's rights and women's reproductive rights. That's, as a woman, that is a top issue. If that is overturned, I would fight in the Wisconsin Assembly to make sure that people still have access to safe and legal abortion.
As we all know, we're going through a moment of reckoning across the country right now, as far as systemic racism and police brutality. Where do you stand on the issue of police funding or reimagining police? If you could wave your magic legislative wand, what would policing in America look like?
I think that this is a conversation that needs to be had with local law enforcement and the communities that they serve. I support our local law enforcement, but I do understand that there are always room for improvement. I think that what happens is we often ask our police officers to perform jobs that they're not trained for, such as being social workers and drug rehabilitation counselors. And that's not fair to them that we're putting them in those positions. So what I think we need to do is we need to fund other services to address issues. We need to fund social workers, and we need to fund drug rehabilitation and addiction counseling, and making sure that those roles are a part of our local law enforcement. So when issues that involve, or when events that involve those issues occur, we can have social workers on scene or counselors on scene to ensure that the situations are handled correctly. I think is really important.
Where as a heterosexual woman, where do you stand on LGBT issues? Do you support the Equality Act?
I think the Equality Act is long overdue. As someone who isn't a member of the LGBTQ community, I promise that as a legislator, I will be an ally and that I will listen to members of the community about what their issues are and how to address them. And I think that all individuals should be protected under the law regardless of sexual orientation.
Okay. Once again, if anybody else, I'm almost out of questions here. So if anybody else has anything else they would like to ask Josefine, please pop it into the chat. Wisconsin has been rated as one of the most, I think, the most segregated state in the country. What do you think the state legislature can do? Again, I'm asking you this as a white woman, and I'm a white male, so how can this legislature work to fix this?
That's, I'm not entirely sure, but I promise that I will talk to members of the community who are individuals of color and learn from them what their issues are and how to best represent them. What I can say right now is that I support the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for racial equality, and I will fight for racial equality in our state legislature. And I will continue having conversations with individuals to ensure that as a white woman, I am being an ally and that I'm accurately representing them in Madison.
Thank you. All right, looks like we are having a couple people that are having to jump off. I'm out of questions unless anybody else has any questions. Josefine, you want to kind of give us a wrap up here? And then I do have, just so everybody knows, when Josefine's done, please stay on the line for a few minutes more. I've got a list of ways that you can get involved with Josefine's campaign. And I am going to send around a survey for people to fill out about how they think this meeting went and any questions they have. So, Josefine, you want to take a few minutes and kind of give us some closing statements here?
I just want to really thank everybody for taking the time to educate themselves on myself as a candidate, and I hope they take the same time to educate themselves on my primary opponent, especially without a debate. I think it's really important that people make sure that they understand the differences between the candidates. In Madison, I can promise that I will fight to represent our rural communities and fight for their best interests. I encourage anybody to reach out to me with their issues. If there are questions that they have after this town hall, my cell phone number and my email, I can post them in the chat here. And you can also find them on my website. I want to be accessible. I want to know what your issues are. And I will try to find ways that I can find solutions for them. But I really just appreciate everybody taking the time this evening to come out and listen to what I have to say and my vision for this district.
Okay, and we do have one other question. The state unemployment office is completely underwater with COVID relief. How do we change that department so it better serves the citizens?
This is a whole new issue now that we're seeing with COVID, this skyrocketing unemployment. Tammy Baldwin has just introduced that HEROES Act in the Senate that is trying to help states with unemployment and job creation programs. I think we kind of need to try to model what FDR did in the New Deal, kind of after the Great Depression for job creation programs. This is something that we need to look into. It's not something that I thought we would have to. The fact that the state unemployment office is, they're months behind. That wasn't an issue when we announced the campaign, not something that I thought that we would have to even think of a solution for, but I'm glad that we understand that there is now, that the system is they're not serving the people the best that they could. So we definitely need to find some improvements for that. This is an issue, again, that I will, tonight I will know a lot more about it, and a week from now, even more so. I encourage you to reach out to me in an email and we can continue this conversation.
Well, thank you, Josefine. So ways that you can get involved in Josefine and help her with Josefine's campaign and help her win her primary. Obviously, the most important, vote now or in person on August 11th. If you need help securing an absentee ballot, myself or Josefine obviously would be happy to help you with that. You can follow Josefine's campaign on Facebook and Instagram, and links to that will be sent out tomorrow in the email. Share Josephine's content with friends and family on social media. Obviously, campaigns look a lot different right now than what we are used to. Social media is one of the most effective ways to amplify our voice and help candidates that we believe in. You can sign up to be a volunteer at josephinejaynes4wi.com. Josephine and I will be working together to schedule some phone banking dates coming up soon. We will also be working together to sign up some days where people will gather to drop flyers on people's doors for her campaign. Obviously, in-person canvassing is not an option right now, but lit drops, literature drops are quite possible. You can donate to the campaign, or you can schedule a time to talk to Josephine by texting 608-606-5306. Also, one other thing would be to send handwritten postcards to voters across the district. Once again, I will be sending out an email to everyone who RSVP'd for this event. It'll go out tomorrow, probably early afternoon. And that is all we have then, folks. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Josephine, you want to give us any parting words?
No, I just really want to thank you and Citizens Action for putting this together, especially when we don't have a debate scheduled before the primary. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to educate yourself on the candidates on your ballot, to hear my ideas, my vision for this district. I really encourage you to reach out to me with any issues that are close to your heart so that I can fight for them in Madison. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time this evening to hear what I have to say.
Great. And folks, a recording, like I said, a recording of this town hall will be sent, a link to a recording will be sent to your email tomorrow. It is also, we have been live streaming onto the Citizen Action of Wisconsin Driftless Co-op Facebook page as well. If you'd like, you can go there and check it out, and you can share this recording. I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. Final round of applause for Josephine, please. All right. Well, thank you all, and I will talk to everyone soon. Thank you much. Bye-bye.